accordance with revisions of Section 10:4-8D of the Open Public Meetings Act, the date, location, and time of the commencement of this meeting is reflected in a meeting notice, a copy of which schedule has been filed with the village manager and the village clerk, the Ridgewood News and the Record newspapers, and posted on the bulletin board in the entry lobby of the village municipal offices at 131 North Maple Avenue and on the village website, all in accordance with revisions of the Open Public Meetings Act.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Please stand for the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Michael, roll call.
Mayor Knutson.
Here.
Councilman Boyd.
Here.
Mr. Torrielli.
Here.
Mr. McWilliams.
Here.
Schreibner.
Here.
Mr. Joel.
Here.
Ms. Altano. Ms. Patiri. Ms. Giordano. Ms. Bartow.
Here.
Okay, thanks, Michael. All right, our first agenda item is public comments on topics not pending before the board. Okay, anyone from the public? Okay, seeing that there's no one, we'll move on to the next item. Committee, commission, professional updates for non-agenda topics. Do I have any to my right? Any to my left? Okay, we'll move on. Michael, have we received any correspondence?
No, we haven't.
Okay. All right, and I would just like to note that Carrie Giordano has resigned from the board, and she's moving out of the area, so I would like to thank her for her time and service to the board. All right, our next item will be KS Broad Street preliminary and final major site plan, 76 and 80 Chestnut Street and 25 through 27 Franklin Avenue. Block 2005, lots 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. This is public hearing continued from June 6, 2017 without prejudice to the board. Okay, Mr. Tuvell.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Jason Tuvell, attorney for the applicant. We're here, this is our 6th public hearing on this preliminary and final major site plan application. We've presented all of our witnesses. I believe all of the board's witnesses, professionals have also testified. And where we left it off at the last meeting, Mr. Chairman, is we were going to open it up to the public. I guess it's for public testimony, if any, and then public comment. And then after that, I'll have all my witnesses here, by the way, as well. But after that, I'd like to give hopefully a brief summation, and we can go into deliberations.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's correct where we're at right now. All right, so this point, we're at public testimony. And this isn't public comment. This is where you want to be a witness and present evidence that's rebutting anything that was presented by the applicant. You would state your name and address, and then you would testify. Then you would be able to be cross-examined. So is there anyone from the public that wants to be a witness for public testimony? Okay, seeing there's no one, we'll move on to public comment. Do I have a motion? Whoop.
No,
Yes, sir.
I actually had a question.
Yeah, sure.
My understanding was, we left off at our last meeting that there was going to be some confirmation of the traffic counts because there were some discrepancies. And I don't know if I'm misremembering, but I just wanted to know where we're at with that because it was a significant discrepancy, and I believe that everybody used that same report from Gordon Meth.
And I believe that was part of the discussion at the last hearing. I believe where it was left off, there was discussion about going and recounting the intersection, but doing that after the building was occupied so that there would be analysis and new numbers once it was occupied. I did check my notes. If they go out and count now, they're confirming existing conditions, which may or may not be similar to what was done in that original traffic study, the numbers that they used for the analysis. The discussion went from there, and my notes are sketchy. I'm going partially by my memory, and I would ask others to see if this is what they recollect from the last hearing, that after the KS development was occupied, they would then do a study to verify the actual traffic patterns and confirm the conditions at the intersections, and if there was mitigation necessary. And this is something that's commonly required in development, that there be, it's called a look back, or to check, confirm exactly what's going on, and if a mitigation is needed because of excess traffic that hadn't been projected in the report, that could be accounted for and mitigated.
Okay, so that isn't not my recollection, nor
Okay.
what I think it would have been what I was looking for. When the issue was raised, it was the concern that there was a discrepancy in the traffic counts, and that there was actually a discrepancy in what you had stated, that there was a discrepancy, in a potential discrepancy in the traffic counts. And at the time, I suggested and recommended that we would want to go back beforehand and have those traffic counts physically confirmed, because that would change the grading or the rating of that particular intersection significantly. So taking a look back wouldn't show what kind of impact occurred if in fact the numbers that we were relying on initially as part of this exercise were inaccurate. So I would never have asked that. I specifically recall asking to have those counts physically confirmed. And I could ask anyone to weigh in on that.
I would agree with the mayor on that. I think we need to take a look. We were going to take a look at that.
I think there was some mention that the counts for existing conditions, but the counts will change with signal improvements. I think you were mentioning that things will change, and then if you change the signals, it'll change what counts come through.
Once you add the new signal and you get the phasing and the actuation, things will readjust, and therefore the traffic patterns for the proposed conditions certainly would be different than the existing conditions. That doesn't mean the volumes would be any less. Certainly the volumes would be the same or more as they increase over time. But the suggestion at that meeting, and I think there was discussion that relooking at the reevaluating the intersection under the proposed traffic conditions would be more worthwhile, because it would then take into account whatever proposed traffic would then be on the roadway. And
So I just don't understand what the logic would be in going back and doing an analysis when your baseline is inaccurate, or potentially there was a discrepancy, so you're using a starting point that's inaccurate, so we don't know what the difference may or may not be. We don't know if it's an improvement or a negligible improvement. We don't know, because there was a question about the discrepancies on the starting point, and I don't understand how we proceed under those circumstances. I fully anticipated coming in here this evening having verified certain intersections to confirm those counts and what the rating was at the intersection.
And Andy, I think the other issue is, if we were to look at the new reconfiguration, that would mean that we'd have to have all 5 lights reconfigured in order to figure that out. And I'm not sure we could even do that, to be honest with you. So
I mean, I'm just trying to, I thought we were coming in here and going to have that added information. I'm thoroughly surprised that we don't have it, and I'm not, whatever that happened there, I don't know.
I think it was an impact analysis we were looking to see today. If my note is correct, and I may have had it written down incorrectly, but I was under the same impression.
Dave, do you have any comments, or Joel? Francis? Okay. Do you have any input, Jason, on that?
Yeah, I mean, I read the transcript from the last meeting. I mean, what Mr. Ferrandis said is correct regarding the look-back issue. We discussed that being a possible condition of approval, although there wasn't a consensus on it. But Mr. Ferrandis is correct. On certain projects, that does become That is sometimes a condition where you have a look back after full construction, and if the mitigation needs to be changed, one way or the other, maybe too much mitigation was put in or too little mitigation was put in, it's reevaluated at a certain time. That was discussed, as well as the impacts of the signal at Franklin and Broad and how the signal timing changing would improve the level of service. But I specifically checked my notes just now too. There was no request at the end of the hearing for any additional information. Or else we would have been all over that to make sure that that was done for this meeting.
I think I made the request that there was no, I think I made the request that there was no specific request at the end of the meeting. I thought we had an understanding that that was going to happen.
Yes, Chris, can anything be subject to confirmed counts and things like that, and then working on something, or how should we?
Well, the counts could be material to the decision.
Yeah.
I mean, usually a look back is for a year afterwards, and it makes sense in that regard. But if there was, I remember there was a discussion on this discrepancy that's in the transcript as to the inconsistent statements made by the engineer that put together the traffic study. I guess it was like 3 or 4 years ago, right?
There was no discrepancy noted in the report. The report that was prepared by Gordon Meth there was no discrepancy there. What Mr. Ferrandis stated at the last meeting was that he observed additional queuing that was not noted in Mr. Meth's report. I believe Mr. Meth is the one that prepared it. Queuing. That was the only issue that was raised. There was no discrepancy that the report was flawed or anything like that, or that there were different methodologies or something like that.
No, I agree, no different methodologies. It's the data that was the concern. I remember that being raised. I remember there was an issue as to, I think both engineers, your engineer and Andrew agreed that there was a discrepancy in that data.
No, that's not true. We did not agree that there was any discrepancy in any data.
I got to say that I think that
But I believe that they cited
inconsistencies and a discrepancy because that there was a difference in that, and that would have changed, if my recollection is accurate, it would have changed the grading of that. Is that would be correct then? It would have changed the grading of that particular intersection. And I'm just saying, I think that the board has the right to rely on accurate information, and for that reason, I did ask that the counts be physically confirmed. And
to me, Mr. Mayor, to me, Mayor,
that
is
Mr. too.
No,
It's
sorry,
okay.
I apologize. I didn't mean to. It's hot in here, so I apologize for saying
That's
that.
okay.
What you're talking about is a design issue, if it's the grading that you're worried about. So, as a condition of approval, if there needs to be any grading change as a result of any further counts that are done, we can certainly do that. That's not an issue. But there was no discrepancy noted, Mayor, in terms of the report that was provided. All I remember from the last meeting and from reading the transcript is that Mr. Ferrandis said when he was out there himself, he observed some queuing at the intersection. And that was what was discussed. And if we need to do some counts to look at the grading issue, we're happy to do that and work with the board, a traffic expert, as a condition. That's not an issue.
I'm just not sure how it's relevant to how we proceed, right? I mean, I don't know. I guess
We're in full agreement with all of the comments noted in both traffic engineers' reports. There were this is unusual, you had 2 reports issued by your traffic expert on this project. You had an on-site traffic expert report that dealt with everything on-site, and then you had an off-track that dealt with the intersections adjacent to the property, as well as intersections that were a block or 2 away. And we agree to comply with that report. Yet there was a full analysis done from a traffic perspective.
Jason, could I ask you a question? I mean, and it relates to you said the look back. So if we do this now, which I think is probably what we should do as even a condition of approval, and we look back and it is worse, what happens then? I mean,
I would defer to your traffic expert on that, but if there was additional mitigation that was required, that was something that your traffic engineer would recommend.
And the applicant would pay for that.
If that was, yes, if it was related to our pro rata share and improvements that we were doing, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah.
Would that be a suitable way to address that, Andrew?
That is typically how it's done as a condition, that the mitigation be provided by the applicant for whatever contribution they're causing.
All right, let me just take the sentiments of the board as to proceeding. Dave, do you want to proceed tonight, or do you feel apprehensive, or?
I don't feel apprehensive. I feel we could go forward.
Okay.
I think as a condition of approval, we need to do this analysis beforehand, and we need to understand what that is. And I guess my question is, if we find if we find it's worse, what does that mean from a cost standpoint, from our standpoint, and the applicant's standpoint? How is that apportioned is my concern, and I'm not sure what we would do. To be honest with you. And then even with a look back a year later, let's assume that they put the new light in, it becomes worse. We need to understand what that would mean as well from a...
As it relates to the improvements that we're doing, we would, if there was indeed an issue where we had to provide further mitigation as to what we need to do, and your traffic engineer and our traffic engineer recommended additional mitigation after a look back on aspects of the project that we constructed and that were our responsibility, then yes, they would become our responsibility if that was a condition that the board placed on the application.
Okay. Well, then I guess I'm okay if that's the way we work on this.
Okay. Mayor, how do you feel?
Just thinking.
All right. Francis, how do you feel?
You know, I have some reservation about going forward without having a full, you know, all the information that our board has requested, as the mayor noted. And we're talking pro rata shares. What does that mean for the village? We've had these discussions about the traffic impacting not only just that one intersection, but the entire street going down Franklin, how much money we're going to have to expend possibly on the timing of other lights. I think we need to be fully informed before we take any action tonight, and that's my opinion.
Okay, Melanie?
I think I've been vocally concerned about some of that stuff as well, and I'd sooner see us, you know, I know it's frustration to everybody, but I'd sooner see all of the information. I think what we had discussed was something about levels of service E that currently exist, adding in other units, adding in other apartment, other buildings nearby, and the retail space involved with this one. I always think I'd rather err on the side of caution and see everything we have to answer to the residents. I'd rather be able to say exactly why we choose what we choose, so.
Okay. Joel?
So as far as the traffic reports, I mean, I don't question the traffic reports. I recall, I think Andrew mentioning he noticed queuing from Wilsey Square under the trestle, which is a good observation, under the train trestle.
Wilsey. W-I-L.
W-I-L-S-E-Y. Wilsey Square under the train trestle, which is a good observation. We probably all noticed it, but it's one thing to have kind of an anecdotal observations, another to have it in a report, and we have these reports. My bigger concern is on a grander scale what's happening on Franklin. So we have the application here, we have a drive-through Starbucks that's going to contribute to traffic, we have other multifamily housing. So whatever was analyzed by Gordon Meth previously, I don't think took all of this into account. That's my concern is, I mean, we can kind of see the train coming down the track, and all these pieces aren't really, we're not making a puzzle right now, but all the pieces are there. We just need to kind of put it together so we understand what's really going to happen. And I guess as a side note, something that just stuck with me, it might be a question for Andrew, is I know we talked about the cost of upgrading a traffic light is like $400,000, but you could build like a single-family detached dwelling for $400,000. It's outrageous. So I don't know if there's like new technology coming or different ways to do it. We can reprogram a light that it doesn't need to be $400,000. It seems outrageous to me. I don't know if we're using old technology or what's going on, but I guess I challenge technology a little bit there. Maybe there's a better solution. We all want safe, efficient intersections, but for $400,000, it seems absurd.
Are you for proceeding or not proceeding?
I have some reservations based on everything that's happening on Franklin, but I don't question the traffic reports. And I don't think we should throw them out because if he noticed something or I noticed something, you notice, I don't think that's enough to throw out a report from an engineer that's been qualified, and we've spent hours vetting those reports. I think they're okay.
So that's a yes on proceeding. More
I
or
guess
less.
so.
Yeah.
With some reservations, though,
Yeah,
about the other stuff.
no, I think it's a valid concern. Traffic always concerns us on this, and I think the look back is the best way to analyze it, because there's going to be stuff happening, like you said, and I think that certain things can be done, and it might have to be after you know what the counts are and things like that, so.
We are willing to work with the board, the applicant is willing to work with the board and the village on the look-back issue, as well as any additional information on the improvements that we are doing as part of the process and as a condition of approval.
Can I mention one more thing, Richard?
Yeah, sure.
What Jason kind of slipped in there at the end, which I think is an important detail, we talked about whatever, with the look back, Andrew would make recommendations, but he slipped in that your engineer would have to agree with his recommendations. And then I think it becomes quite subjective. I mean, obviously you need to defend your position, but it's like,
Right, then you
then
would.
you're gonna sit there and,
I
Correct.
can tell you, Joel, that that's not how my resolutions are written. They would have to comply with the board engineer's request, that's it.
okay. I feel a little bit better about it then.
No, I
It's
just
like
don't,
I
I, 27 years of doing this, I don't write them like that.
Okay, Mayor?
All right, so just to, I appreciate Joel, the Vice Chairman's comments. I agree. I think we have a lot of pieces of a puzzle, but those pieces of the puzzle haven't been connected, and maybe when we try to connect them in, there'll be a mess, and it won't work, but I'm comfortable moving forward. I just do have a question for Andy. In that, the light at the corner of Broad and Franklin, now that's the one that actually had to be moved to the opposite corner. Was that, was that the one that actually had to physically be moved? Or there was something about that light?
There's a signal controller, the box that actually runs the intersection.
Right, exactly.
It's shown on the plans to be relocated, and without that box, once it gets moved, basically you have to redo the intersection. You're upgrading the box, you're putting it in a new location. So something has to be done at that point. When you move the heart of the intersection, the wires all have to be redone to the signal heads.
So, and I guess that's more costly.
That makes it a little, once you touch that controller box, it's more costly, yes.
So then my next question is, in terms of that particular signal box being moved, if somebody is touching that, whose responsibility is it, based on the requirements or by law, whose responsibility is it if they touch that light to pay for it? Is there any requirement?
It's shown on the plans as proposed to be relocated. Therefore, I'm looking at it as part of the proposed plans and part of what needs to be done for the development. So proposed means it's part of their plans for improvements at the intersection.
Right. So, but there's no requirement from the DOT or anyone whose responsibility is it if they touch the light?
In this case, it's county jurisdiction, but the county defers to Ridgewood, so
Okay.
it's really Ridgewood's call, it's Ridgewood's.
Okay, so how we do that. Okay, I just want to make sure that we're in control of that decision.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Why does the signal box have to be moved?
Because of its location and because of the way, I guess, the grading for the site and other features. I know it was in the corner where the playground was going to be located.
The amenity
Amenity
area?
area, right.
But
that right?
but the signal box itself is in the public right-of-way?
I believe it is in the.
Yes.
Right,
My traffic engineer is saying yes.
So changes to the grading would actually change the grading in the public right-of-way?
Well, I think what the mayor was getting, if someone touches, they pay for it, I would think.
No, and that's what I was
Yeah.
getting at, but I guess now that Dave has asked that question, it's a question that should be responded to, because that's, I guess that was always in my mind, another ancillary question, right?
Yes.
So what was the response? Did we have one?
I think Chris has a response.
According to the site plan, the existing signal control box or pole is right at the point of curvature of the proposed exiting curve, and it's shown to be relocated back away from the curb by approximately, I'd say, by 5-6 feet, which would make sense because that would minimize its chance of being snagged by an exiting vehicle.
That's a good idea. All right.
Chris, has there ever been other developments of any sort where they had to move the signal box and that the person developing had to pay for it?
Not recently, not in my tenure with the village. We haven't had significant developments at signalized intersections until these multifamily housing applications. This signal is a village signal, so any proposed relocation would have to be done to my satisfaction. I have to review it and sign off on it on behalf of the village.
I think this one's fairly simple, Jason. I don't think you disagree with.
Go ahead.
If they're going to move the box and move the signal, the developer pays for it. If they're going to regrade the right-of-way because you have to do that, the developer pays for it. This is very...
Whatever's legally required, that's...
Well, even better than that. I mean, it's an engineering issue as to grading, and you'll follow that. And if it has to be moved because of the development...
And it's on our plans.
That's not a tangential, that's almost a direct. I mean, that's pretty easy, shooting in that, right? You got to move a signal, you pay for it. You got to change the grading. The civil engineer for the developer will make sure the grading's right. I mean, that's easy. If we're talking 5 lights down the road, it gets a little bit of an
If it's on our plans and we're responsible for constructing it, then yes.
Yes, yeah, it seems pretty easy. No, if I had to move a signal, I'd have to. I'm trying to cut to the, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. Does that mean the full light? Does that mean paying for the full light?
Whatever has to be disturbed and reconstructed in the light world, they would have to deal with that. If there's something on Route 17 that has an effect and we can have evidence about it, there may be a debate, but I see that pretty close to the property.
Okay.
And I'm sure, I mean, Chris has gone over this
Sure,
ad
yes or
nauseam with the engineers for the developer. The grading has to be done properly, so the site and the runoff is appropriate and any kind of detention and all that.
There's no question the grading
How
has
many-
to be done
how
properly
much-
per the board engineer's requirements.
This is our 6th hearing, I think we covered that, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's all in the stipulations, it's all,
They have to do it.
right, okay.
Okay. All right, so I guess the consensus is to keep moving along
Okay.
on this.
You want to open it up to the public? I'll take a step back.
Well, yeah, we have to have a motion to open up to public comment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, Dave, and Melanie, second. Okay, call the roll. And a yes vote will be to open up to public comment.
Mayor Knudsen?
Yes.
Councilman Boyd?
Yes.
Mr. Torrielli?
Yes.
Ms. McWilliams?
Yes.
Mr. Streibner?
Yes.
Mr. Joel?
Yes?
Ms. Borto?
Yes.
No? Yep. Okay, we're at the public comment portion. And if anyone wants to make a public comment, they can come up to the lectern there, state their name and address. And I guess we'll put it at 4 minutes per person, and then we'll just keep proceeding. And if you have additional to say, we'll hear you. Okay.
Yes. Dana Glazer, 61 Clinton Avenue. Glazer. Now, I was at the previous meeting, and I do recall Mayor Knudsen making this request regarding the traffic. And I don't understand why this should be continuing at all. It's very upsetting for me that this should be, I feel like the goalpost has suddenly moved, and that's not fair, and that's not right. Now, outside of that, I'm going to share a very brief anecdote. After the superstorm in 2012, we had a 100-foot tall tree that fell in the back of our yard. It landed, it destroyed my swing set, my kid's swing set, but it also went into the other yard. Now, by law, I am not responsible for the damage that happened in my neighbor's yard. And I'm not responsible for the removal of the tree in his yard. All I'm responsible for is cleaning up my yard. So I spoke with my neighbor about this. And my neighbor said, well, that's the law, but you know what the right thing to do is. And I said, yeah, I do. So I had the tree removed from his yard and from my yard, because it's the right thing to do, because I don't hide behind the law. Because sometimes when you do the right thing, it's what you call doing something for the common good. And what I don't see here is doing the right thing. Doing the right thing means I'm not going to do what's expected of me, what's required of me through the law. Doing the right thing is, okay, I want to build something here, and it's going to impact the community, and it's going to cost taxpayers money so that I can do what I'm going to do. I'm going to cover that. That's what doing the right thing is. So I present this to the developer at hand this evening as something to consider. That yes, we can hide behind the law, and we can say, well, we're going to do what's expected of the law and nothing more, nothing less. Or we can do the right thing. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Glazer. Okay, does anyone else want to make public comment? Okay, state your name and address.
Linda Tarzian, 576 Highland Avenue, Ridgewood. Tarzian, 29-year resident of the village, this little village that I love. I would like to ask each one of you, do you want this to become a Hackensack? And with these 4 developments, I know this is public comment, these 4 developments are going to turn this town into a Hackensack. When I am trying to get from the west side of town into the beloved downtown, it takes me about 4 lights and about 10 minutes at least. If you had 66 units or 64 units at the Ken Smith facility, what is that going to do with only 1 lane going each way? And I know it's been discussed, but I don't know if the people here have understood the impact for an ambulance or police car. There'll be no way for them to get through. The quality of life. We chose to move to Ridgewood for the small town feel. These 4 developments are going to totally change that negatively, in my perception. If someone proposes to build a prison here, do you have to do it? If someone proposed to put a zoo on the Ken Smith facility, do you have to do it if it was part of the loophole that was created in that short period? Is this the future you want for this town? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tarzian.
Good evening, Ann Loving, Loving. 342 South Irving Street. There's just a few things I wanted to comment about this development. First thing, just in general about the traffic. That's just such a horrible strip along there, and Councilman Voigt has been very clear, and I completely agree with him, about all the traffic lights that are going to be messed up because of the traffic coming in and out of this development. I do not understand how it can possibly be written in that there could be a look back a year or so later. That, I mean, it just seems to me it would have to be a few $1 million would have to be put in escrow in order to possibly correct the mess. It talked about having the lights on timers, but the one right by the train trestle is going to be, I forgot what the word is, activated by a pedestrian, so that's going to throw the timer off. So to me, the timing is going to be off. It's going to be a nightmare. I do not understand how we could resolve that with a look back. I have concerns about water. We have so many issues with water shortage in this town, and you're adding all these units. I do not understand how we can have increased usage in water and not be worrying about that. I've heard that this is not going to be affecting the schools, the police, the emergency services, fire department. I don't understand how that's possible. I mean, you add 66 units with maybe 4 people or more per unit. I think that there's going to be a big impact. There was much talk about walkability, this location being very walkable. I think that's completely bogus. Everybody has cars. Everybody has cars, and people are going to be driving. Yeah, some people will commute by train, no doubt about that, but I think that everybody there is going to have a car, and I think the argument about the walkability is bogus. There's going to be retail on the ground floor. People are going to be driving in and out. I also have huge concerns about the sanitary sewer. You know, the way I understood it from the discussions in the last 2 meetings was that the applicant would be responsible for the pipe as far as the street, but then the pipe going all the way down the street and I guess turning the corner and heading over to Glenrock is going to be, I guess, the village's responsibility. We were told at the last meeting or the meeting before that the applicant would have to verify if the sanitary sewage flow was adequate. Well, when? You know, after it's occupied, after everybody's flushing, you know, so I hope that that's going to be added in so that if the sanitary sewer pipe blows down, you know, by Maple Avenue, I mean, that we don't have to pay for that.
1 minute
Basically-
remaining.
Pardon me?
1 minute remaining.
1 minute, thank you. Okay. Basically, what I see is that there's going to be an unquantifiable increase in cost to the taxpayers with this, with zero benefit to the taxpayers. This is going to cost us possibly huge amounts of money for traffic remediation, for sewage remediation, for schools, police, fire, and the only person who's going to benefit is the developer, certainly not the taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lovin. Anyone else?
Dave Sloman. Dave Sloman, S-L-O-M-I-N, 36 Heights Road, Ridgewood. Heights, H-E-I-G-H-T-S. I guess I want to begin by saying I support a lot of the discussion you guys have had today. I support everything I've heard from the residents tonight. And I want to begin by saying something that occurred to me the last meeting. Is that you guys, you know, first off, thank you for taking on such a hard job right now. We respect, I think everybody here respects what you did and took on at such a difficult time. And I've been doing some of you guys for many years. But you guys are the planning board, you're not the applicant board. And there's a big difference. I've heard still unanswered questions from Mayor Knudsen, Councilman Voigt, board members Bardo, McWilliams. And I feel like with some of this information, you might be a week or 2 away from having all the questions answered you need to really make the right decision. The last meeting was several hours on off-site improvements and traffic. And a lot of questions were raised, and they really weren't answered yet. And some of them potentially could be answered later. Some you're going to find out new information once a building's built. But some of them need to be known ahead of time. The village, you guys have a requirement to know, have a better handle on what the cost of off-site improvements are going to be before you make a determination on a vote. And I don't think you have the information yet, especially on traffic. Some of the other sites, sewer, I haven't heard discussions here at the meetings I've been at as far as sewer. But without a better answers to the planning board's residents and Andrew's questions, and Andrew did raise some questions last week, this is reaction, not planning. And as trustee for Ridgewood Citizens for Reasonable Development, I want to advocate for not reactivity, but proper master planning, which is really what the outcome of this site plan is. To plan correctly. If you need a couple of weeks please put it off. Get your questions answered. That said, I believe you do need answers to these questions, especially on traffic, especially on sewer, water as well. But I do think Ridgewood needs proper development and reasonable development. Representing the other trustees of RCRD and the thousands of supporters and donors to our cause over the last 5 or 6 years, this development as it stands now doesn't meet the terms reasonable. It's not as if this were planned properly from a proactive master planning. It's a reactive. From my understanding, we were called, a group of citizens were called to meet at Village Hall earlier in the year, and there were some changes to these plans that were presented, and we were asked, how would you feel about that? And I just want to go on record as saying, with some reasonable changes, I would support the development that you guys have. I don't think what we've been presented, what we saw on the storyboards or the architectural boards last night. Give the village, give the residents who have spoken in our votes at the last 2 council elections, where everybody elected to council was vehemently against the levels of development that is before us tonight. I think you guys have, between the planning board and the council, potentially ways to make this more reasonable, more right for Ridgewood. And I would say before you vote, put it out in the open. Let's get it right, and please do everything you can for your residents. Ask your questions, make your decisions, and please get it right. Make it reasonable. Thank you very much, and thanks for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Snow. Yes.
I think your microphone is off. If you want to hit the on button down at the bottom of it.
Is that better?
Yes.
So I think we can all agree, development can be welcome. These places have become eyesores, so we're not against development. I'm not. Love to welcome it, especially if we can fill the retail spaces, existing ones, which has been empty. But I think, to echo my former colleague's comments, can we scale back the height to keep it in line with the historic nature of our beautiful village? Would he consider, or would the developer consider, reducing the number of units to reduce the taxation on our village services, and maybe consider selling the units so the taxes would be collected from each unit to support the sewer, the schools, and our fire and police. So I'm hoping you will take that into serious consideration. All of these in concert are going to change the nature of the village that we love. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ed Feltzott, F-E-L-D-S-O-T-T, 67 Heights Road, Ridgewood. I would just like to support my neighbors, Dave Sloman, and others who have stood up here and they've spoken about reasonable development. I think most residents would agree with that. Reasonable development, not what is being put forward today. One of the reasons there was a change in city village council is because people were tired of the old village council and wanted a change, and they did not want the overdevelopment of Ridgewood. Yeah, it's great for the developers. Obviously, they're spending a lot of money on legal fees, but you have to do what's best for us residents. And I moved to Ridgewood. I have a business up in Mahwah, so this was a convenient town, but there are many convenient towns. I picked Ridgewood because it was a quaint town that reminded me of Scarsdale, where I grew up. It wasn't overdeveloped. There weren't these huge parking lots, and it was a really beautiful town. The other thing I want to point out is people speak about, bringing shopping back to Ridgewood. Well, I think Macy's and Nordstrom's are trying to figure out how to bring shopping back to their stores. People are not shopping. They are not going to retail stores like they did 20 years ago. People are shopping online. If you look at Montclair and other villages, what you'll see is a robust restaurant business. Restaurants work on a 70% profit margin. We just had the young women's clothing store go out of business on the main street. Gypsy Warrior. My niece worked for them. She was hired for the summer, and after 2 weeks, she was told they couldn't pay their rent on their warehouse, and they were forced to close. That's because you can't work on 35, 45% profit margin and have a business that's paying high taxes like businesses pay in Ridgewood. If you own a restaurant and you're working on 70% margin or better, and you scrimp on your ingredients, you can make ends meet. So I do see there's going to be changes in Ridgewood. I think we'll be much more of a restaurant-type town. I think that
1 minute remaining.
Stores opening in Ridgewood is over. So I would like to see some changes here. I would like to see Ridgewood thrive and grow, but I would not like to see us turn into a Hackensack or an Englewood or an overdeveloped town like White Plains. That's it. And you guys have done a good job. You've listened to a lot of feedback, and we do appreciate it. And we just hope you make a hasty decision, because this decision is going to affect the town for decades to come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Feldsant.
Artist D'Angelo, 414, Artist, A-R-D-I-S, D'Angelo, D'', A-N-G-E-L-O, 414 Red Birch Court. Sure. I've lived in Ridgewood for 14 years. I have 3 children who were all born here and have grown up here. Sorry. I am disturbed that even though concerns about public safety have been raised, talk of this housing proposal is still at risk of being pushed through. Water restrictions for the past 2 years have been heightened much more than in years past. This is all without any additional homes. Now imagine adding a significant number of new apartments. How can we allow something as large as this to pass when we don't know how it will impact our water shortage? It's our job to protect our residents. What if there's a fire? Will there be enough water pressure in the hydrant to save the house? No one knows for sure, and the builders don't care. And then there's the issue of traffic. Several years ago, a friend of mine, mom of 3, was hit by a car in town. Through a miracle, she survived, and she's okay, even though she had severe internal bleeding, and it was touch and go for quite a while. I remember the pit in the stomach of every person that knew her, how we hung on day to day, crying and praying for her to pull through. I remember this like it was yesterday. Imagine how many more accidents like this will happen with the additional traffic caused by this many new units in such a condensed space. These accidents are going to happen more and more often, and the next time we might not be so lucky. Think of the kids of the mother who gets hit by that car. Think of the husband who's now forced to continue raising them alone and live his life without his wife. And then there's the schools. I understand that a study was done last year that found that all these new units would result in so few students that the impact to the town would be de minimis. Anyone in this town who has heard about that study has heard the so-called results of the study and literally laughs when talking about it. Ask yourself, how could this many new units truly result in a non-impactful number of new students? I came here for the Ridgewood schools. Almost everyone I know has come to Ridgewood for the well-known schools. If apartments are built, people will come for the schools. So of course they'll have kids. That's why people come to Ridgewood. I think everyone knows the study resulted in false information in order to move forward an agenda that was being pushed by people who want these buildings to be approved. And then I learned at the last meeting that there will need to be upgrades to traffic lights, both at the intersection of the site and surrounding intersections. So just to be clear, the Ridgewood taxpayers who don't want these buildings in our town will now have to pay extra to support these new intersection upgrades. That's a scam on the Ridgewood families. Everyone I've spoken to regarding the high-density buildings don't want them. The families here don't want them. And now the town is going to have to pay to have something that none of us want. How can we in good conscience vote yes to this? I know there's a concern of a lawsuit if the planning board votes no. But consider this. I personally would rather Ridgewood pay more to defend a lawsuit than have Ridgewood pay to enable the implementation of something that the people of Ridgewood don't even want. And I know I'm not alone in this opinion. It's very easy to understand what's happening here. Builders have a lot of money at stake and want to push this through for their own financial gain. But what about the people of Ridgewood? Where does that leave us? Tonight, I ask you to vote your conscience. What you know in your heart is right for the Ridgewood people, both from a safety perspective and from the perspective of how this will impact our schools. I know several friends who really wanted to be here tonight, but it's summertime and people have plans. Please don't mistake the empty seats to mean that the Ridgewood public supports this in any way. There are reasons why people couldn't be here to show their opposition. Some are on vacation, some are at their kids' baseball game. But please know that their absence doesn't mean that they actually want this building, as it is proposed, to go in. Everyone I've spoken to is against this. Please consider that when you are voting, and don't simply cower to the threat of a lawsuit by political bullies who don't care at all about Ridgewood or its people. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ms. D'Angelo.
Hi, Jane Remus, 118 Madison Place. It's R-E-M-I-S. Okay. I'm kind of just, what I have to say is similar to what the last speaker said, in that, you know, I guess I am concerned about the traffic, and I know we need to upgrade those traffic lights. I think what I've heard is Chris say is that they're like already 25 years out of date, and so one way or the other they need to be replaced. But I can put up with a little more traffic, but I'm much more concerned about what the developers will do to increase pedestrian safety, because if they put in like a CVS type store, which I actually think might be a nice, like, it might be nice to have a store that you could go to for different things and walk to, but I would want to be able to safely walk there. And every day after school, I've actually gone and counted the GW students that walk toward town, and you can't really count them, but it's like, it's got to be 100. Fridays more. They go to West Side Bagel, they go into the Village. And if there's something like a CVS type store, they're all going to be going there. So that's my concern, is can we do something to get them there more safely? And is that in the plans? If it has, I'm sorry, I missed it. But, you know, I'd like to find, and then, you know, also, like, I know we're trying to do a lot to make this a walkable town for seniors, and this is probably an undoable idea, but, like, is there any way to make some sort of pedestrian walkway from, like, Ridgecrest down to that, I don't know how that would work, but, like, down to that development if they wanted to go to that store, because, you know, rather than having them come down, you know, and not just the seniors, but like anyone who lives in the Heights area, you know, without coming down to Ridgewood Avenue, crossing at the train station, crossing again, is there any possible way to make some sort of connection in case there's a store, or if you want to go to even East Coast Burger or something, you're just crossing like one of the worst intersections in town. So that, you know, basically that's my, you know, that's all I have to say, is I hope that there's going to be something done for pedestrian safety in the event that, you know, a store that has like a variety, you know, if they need poster paper for their, or they just want to hang it, you know, go there after school and spend a few minutes before they go home. That's, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Remus.
Marisol Romero, M-A-R-I-S-O-L, R-O-M-E-R-O, 258 Stylen Avenue, Steilen. Good evening. Basically, just 2 points. First is, when I think of everything that's been spoken about in regards to like the safety and the traffic, I keep thinking about the children. And prime example was about 2 weeks ago, my son, my oldest, attends Ridge, and third graders did their annual trip, which was hosted in part by the village, which was very nice. Thank you, Mayor Knudsen. And they had to walk from Ridge all the way down underneath the train station down to Graydon, because they came to visit the village and get to know how the village works, and then they went to Graydon Pool. And I can tell you, there were at least 75 students. That's not including the teachers and the aides. And when I think about that, that there is this swarm or this big group of children that do a yearly trip. It's part of their yearly trip. They're so excited to come and visit the village and then go to Graydon Pool. They're going to have to take that long trip, and I just keep thinking about the traffic, and the traffic. Because the more traffic you have, and I should know this, I grew up in Queens, the higher risk and incidences of accidents. And I can't just imagine, because someone pointed that out, if it's a one-way this way, one-way that way, heaven forbid someone is struck, how do we get to that person to give them immediate care or take them to the hospital? And then my second point is, the one thing I keep hearing, and I appreciate that some of the members said this, was that, you know, we have all these trains that are nice and shiny and they're moving, but we really don't have a good sense, or at least I don't get that feeling, of how the whole picture is going to look. And to me, there's a saying, the truth is always shorter, but I don't feel like I'm getting that from the developers. I don't feel like we're getting answers, clear-cut, black and white answers about things that are going to be happening, or the way things are going to flow, or this or that. And it makes me feel really uncomfortable. And I think I would agree with some of the people that spoke that regardless of how you feel, whether you're for the development or against the development, at a minimum, this has to be thorough planning. And so I would ask that when you think about pushing through on this, have we really done due diligence? And I feel like we have not done due diligence, not because you guys haven't asked the right questions, but because we're not getting answers that are clear-cut. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Romero.
I figured my enormous tax rate allows me to speak one more time.
There must be triplets in the room.
I hope that, and again, I thank all of you, I didn't do that earlier, for the responsibility you've taken on to serve us.
Just state your name again, because she's taken a record.
Linda Tarzian, Tarzian, 576 Highland Avenue. And I know that you're not supposed to look at all the proposals, but I'm asking you, as a resident, that when you consider tonight's proposal, that you really look at the impact on the corridor, the L-shaped corridor, Broad to Franklin, and what its nightmare it's going to be like. Because it's been shut. Ken Smith has been shuttered for how many years? And when it was open, there would maybe be one car going in every half hour. It was 66 units or 64 units, correct me if I'm wrong. 2 cars per unit, probably 2 to 4 kids per unit eventually. There is going to be a significant impact. We talked about it all. I just want you to know, again, even though the representation isn't here tonight, as taxpayers, we do not want it as is. We understand there are ways to beautify the downtown district. Somebody owns the property. What about a retirement center or adult housing? Scale it back. There might be less cars with seniors in there. Sell the units. There might be another way to get around some of the valid concerns. Right now, I'm allowed to water my lawn twice. I'm very concerned the impact that has been raised on the water. 66 units on top of all the other ones that are being considered and already approved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tarzian. Anyone else? Okay. All right, seeing there's no one else from the public that would like to make a comment, I guess, Mr. Duval, you can make a closing statement. Oh, all right. Do I have a motion to close public comment?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, call the roll, Michael?
Mayor Knutson,
Yes.
Councilman Voigt,
Yes.
Mr. Torrielli,
Yes.
Ms. McWilliams,
Yes.
Mr. Schreibner,
Yes.
Mr. Joel,
Yes.
Ms. Borto.
Yes.
Okay, public comment is closed, and now we're going to move on to a closing statement from the applicant.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mayor, Councilman Voigt, members of the board, for your time and attention during the course of these proceedings. I think we're on our 6th proceeding over a 9-month period. The first thing that I wanted to talk about in connection with this application is the role of the board. I think that's an extremely important aspect of this application and the board's deliberation. And forgive me if I am a little professorial here on what the law is, but I think it's very important to the board's decision-making in connection with this application. This application, the planning board specifically, is governed by Section 25 of the Municipal Land Use Law, which are the duties and powers of the planning board. Duties and power of the planning board, there are different categories: subdivision, capital improvements, variances, conditional uses, site plan. Only one applies here, which is site plan. We have no variances, we have no conditional uses. We're not talking about a capital improvement project. So the scope of the board's review is extremely narrow. And what the case law has said about the scope of that review is, and I'm going to quote, this isn't me, this is what the courts say, is that a planning board's role in considering a site plan application is circumscribed. Role in considering a site plan application is circumscribed. The object of site plan review is to assure compliance with the standards under the municipality's site plan and land use ordinances. And that's a case from the Appellate Division from 1997, Shim versus Washington Township Planning Board. So site plan review was never intended to include, and this is again another quote that was actually used in your council's memo that I agree with in terms of the direction that the board has to go in connection with this application, is site plan review was never intended to include the legislative or quasi-judicial power to prohibit a permitted use. So where does that leave us? What does the case law then say? What flows from there? And what flows from there is that a planning board, and this is again quotes from an appellate division decision, is that a planning board has no authority to deny a site plan on its view that a use permitted under the zoning ordinance is inconsistent with principles of sound zoning. So that's the premise, that is the scope of the board's review. I know many of you know this, but I think it's important for everyone to understand this during the course of their deliberation. And why is that important? Why is it important that we have these laws, rules, and regulations in connection with a board's review? Well, there's policy reasons, very important policy reasons about it. Number one, it would lead to arbitrary rulings. Boards could just simply make arbitrary rulings. There would be no guidelines, rules, or regulations, and there would basically be anarchy with respect to zoning and planning throughout the state. It would violate due process. Applicants, developers, whether it's an individual, a developer, a corporation, a nonprofit, whatever, there's an expectation that an applicant has when they come to a planning board, that when they comply with the rules and regulations, that the application will ultimately be approved. Now, what I said, based on a lot of the comments that have been received this evening and that we've heard during the course of the proceedings, is not a very popular statement. All right, it doesn't. I don't consider myself a brain surgeon for figuring that out. That the zoning and the planning principles that guide this application are not very popular within this room. But that's the law that this board is guided by. And as a board member, you're obligated to follow those laws, whether they're popular or not. This is a fully conforming site plan before this board. That's a very rare thing, actually. I doubt many attorneys, and I do this on a regular basis, have an application that is completely variance or waiver-free. This application complies with all the zoning regulations within your ordinance and site plan regulations within your ordinance. What that means is that the applicant has designed a plan within the confines of the laws of the village, which have already been set out and is consistent with its master plan and zoning goals and objectives. So what does the law dictate there? And then, again, I'm going to quote from case law, this isn't me talking, is that the denial of a site plan application would be a drastic action when the pertinent ordinance standards are met. When the pertinent ordinance standards are met.
I think it's drastic measure under the Shim case, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm quoting actually directly from the case law itself. I didn't paraphrase or anything, I'm just quoting directly.
I have the quote.
Yeah, I think you have it as well, in your memo. There's also the Dunkin' Donuts case versus Township of North Brunswick, which states that when an applicant meets zoning and site plan ordinance standards, off-site traffic conditions cannot be a basis for a denial. That's also important because we've heard a lot about off-site traffic and a lot about off-site conditions, and I'll get to more about that in a minute. But again, looking at the confines of the board's analysis and the board's purview, it's very important that you stick within those confines. Architecture. There's case law on this issue as well, which says that a board does not sit as an architectural review board, and that generally the style of architecture is the exclusive prerogative of the applicant, so long as all the other ordinance requirements are met. That's, again, not me. That's straight from the case law that govern planning and zoning board proceedings. So this application conforms, and that's with all of your zoning requirements and site plan requirements, and that's been confirmed by both planners for the village that have reviewed this site plan. And in fact, to be quite honest, it's actually less intense than some of the zoning ordinance requirements. For example, the zoning allows 35 units to the acre. This is 32.8 units to the acre. We're actually less than the impervious surface that's permitted, and we're reducing it from existing conditions, which you don't get a lot in urban area and are actually preferred from a planning standpoint. We're more than double the size of the lot area that's required. And our FAR, our floor area ratio, which really goes to the non-residential component of the application, is actually 28% of less than what is permitted. So we're actually under we meet a lot of the requirements on point, but we're actually below a lot of the permitted standards in terms of intensity. We also meet the affordable housing obligation that we're required to have in connection with this application. Now, there were some comments made that there wasn't enough due diligence done. In fact, I've actually never worked on an application that had so much due diligence done. There is a complete document that governs the traffic impacts of all four of these developments. I mean, I know we're only talking about this one, but there was an analysis done that went site by site, analyzed all of these issues from a traffic standpoint, utility standpoint, municipal services standpoint, school standpoint. It's very rare that as an attorney I actually get to work on a project that actually analyzes all those things within the confines of a permitted use. So to say that there hasn't been due diligence done, and I know, listen, when there's change, people are apprehensive, and that's only human nature. So I don't blame people for saying what they say or thinking what they think. But there has been an enormous amount of due diligence done in connection with this application. I wasn't a part of it. I know many of you were. There were hearings upon hearings where experts discussed many of these issues. So you ask, well, if we meet all these requirements and we're fully conforming and you must approve the application, and that's what I'm saying, well, why are we even here in the first place? So we're here in the first place because a planning board still has the obligation and the duty to impose, if it feels necessary, reasonable conditions on a site plan, even if it's fully conforming. It can impose reasonable conditions. It must approve, but there can be reasonable conditions that are implemented. So let's talk about some of the reasonable conditions that have been implemented during the course of the dialogue between the board, the applicant, and the public, and all of the professionals that have been associated with the project. So number one, We've agreed to meet all the requirements of the village engineer. His report had site plan requirements, stormwater management requirements, soil movement requirements, and sanitary sewer service requirements. And we've agreed to comply with all aspects of his report in all of those categories. Your traffic engineer, as I mentioned earlier, Shropshire and Associates. What was that? Shropshire and Associates. They issued their initial letter on January 17th. I think that was probably our second or third meeting. So we got an initial report. We thought that was going to be the only report, but we got another one. But in connection with that first report, which mainly dealt with on-site issues, but delved into off-site to some degree, we agreed, and I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. I'm not going to verbatim go through the report. But some of the issues that some of the items that we agreed to. We agreed to everything in the report, but just some of the highlights for the board's recollection. We agreed to increase the visibility of the signal heads. We agreed to ensure that the stop bars are properly located within the development. We already had stop bars placed. There were some additional recommendations by your traffic professional that we agreed to. We're improving the sidewalk across the driveways by way of color and texture to delineate vehicular crossings for pedestrian access. In terms of on-site circulation, we agreed to modify the signage on site to delineate to your traffic engineer satisfaction the fire lanes that are associated with the project. We complied with all regulations and fire codes, but there were some additional items that were requested for on-site circulation. From a parking standpoint, not only your planner, but your board engineer confirmed that we not only comply with the residential site improvement standards, otherwise known as RSIS, in connection with the residential development of this application, but as part of all of the parking as it relates to non-residential as well. So we comply with the ordinance, we comply with RSIS, we also comply with the ADA requirements as to parking. There were some comments that we agreed to as well. Designated certain parking spaces as employee parking, providing protection for the building columns on the site, modifying the location of handicap signs, and we're agreeing to prohibit parking along the site's frontages. In terms of trip generation, something that was discussed this evening, the report indicated that they agreed with the trip generation analysis utilized in the report. When I say report, I mean proposed by the applicant or testified to by the applicant. There were some technical design requests for the signals that we agreed to comply with. So that was the first traffic engineer letter. So like I said, in terms of due diligence, not only do we have the history of all the traffic analysis done in connection with these projects, we also had 2 traffic reports done for this project, as well as your village engineer's civil review letter as well. So in terms of the second letter that was issued on April 13th, 2017, there were 6 comments that were made, and based on those 6 comments, there were 6 recommendations that were suggested by your traffic expert. So number 1, and we agreed to comply with all of them, but just to sort of summarize what they are. We agreed to repair all of the sidewalk on the south side of Franklin and east side of Chestnut pursuant to the report. We agreed to restripe all crosswalks proposed between Chestnut and Franklin as indicated in the report, and ensure that all of the handicap ramping was ADA compliant. The North Broad and Franklin signal was discussed a lot by the board as well as the traffic expert. The traffic expert had some recommendations for that signal. We agreed to the actuation on each approach. We agreed to video detection. We agreed to improving the visibility of the signal heads. The handicap ramps are to be updated per the board engineer's letter, and we're installing a Franklin Avenue crosswalk pursuant to the letter as well. The 4th recommendation was that we provide traffic striping and pavement markings, and that they be replaced along Franklin between Chestnut and North Broad. We agreed to doing that. 5th recommendation, we agreed to reinstall the Chestnut Street center line. And finally, we agreed to the proposed improvements indicated in the report for the signal at the intersection of Franklin and Oak Street. So, in terms of due diligence and traffic analysis, we agreed to comply with both of your traffic experts' recommendations for both on-site and off-site improvements that we can make. Lastly, your planner's letter. Your planner again confirmed that we are fully compliant with the applicable ordinance requirements that govern this application. We agreed with the landscaping comments provided in her report, as well as the crosswalk comments to the amenity area. And when I say her report, I mean Ms. McManus's report dated May 12th, or updated as of May 12th, 2017. Despite the case law that I read on architecture, we also agreed, since architecture can be somewhat subjective, to meet with Ms. McManus, the planner, as well as the subcommittee of the board to work out any architectural comments that the board may have that could potentially lead to an aesthetic change to the building. So those were the changes that we agreed to as part of, or reasonable conditions that I like to call them, that the board implemented on a fully conforming site plan based on the recommendations of the board's experts. Now, there are other changes that we made to the plan based on back and forth between the board and some initial dialogue that we had with the board and its experts. For example, and I won't name them all, and just bear with me, I promise I'm going to finish soon. We agreed to place an 8-inch diameter main within Franklin Avenue and to be lined to reduce inflow and infiltration. The developer agreed to monitor the sanitary flow through a meter. The parking area as viewed from Chestnut Street is now completely screened. We reduced, and I don't know if everyone here remembers, we reduced the retail space in connection with this project from 8,000 square feet to 5,500 square feet. So I know that was done probably in the first several months of our hearings. I don't know if a lot of the members of the public were at those meetings, but we did reduce significantly the portion of the development that's related to the retail space. We made sure that all proper side triangles were established. There were 22 spaces adjacent to the building that have been changed for retail use only. That was at the request of several of the board members at one of our first meetings. The parking space sizes were modified to comply with all RSIS requirements. By doing that, our application fully conformed with all residential site improvement standards as it relates to parking and drive aisles and all other applicable state requirements. So my point to the board in raising all that is that the process basically played out exactly as it should, in that you have a permitted use that's fully compliant. However, the board has a chance to review it and say, hey, what could we do to make this project a little bit better, even though it fully conforms? And from that, we have that entire list of items that I just mentioned that have been implemented based on dialogue between the applicant and the board, its professionals, and questions and comments that we've received from the public. And that wasn't rushed. That was over a course of 6 hearings over 9 months. It's not as if we had 1 or 2 meetings on this project and just we're done. It was a long dialogue between the board and the applicant in connection with this project. Another thing that I'd like to mention is, unlike some of the other multifamily housing projects were mentioned, and I know they kind of get grouped together, even though they should all be viewed individually and on their own merits, but since they were mentioned, I believe this is the only one that is seeking absolutely no relief whatsoever from the ordinance. I believe some of the others had some maybe minor variances or deviations, but this application does not deviate at all. I just wanted that to be noted. So, in sum, the board has an obligation here to approve this application under the law with reasonable conditions. I believe I've read, and maybe the board will have some additional ones based on what their counsel has written during the course of the meetings or during deliberations, but we've gone through the process as it should. And I think we've come up with a better plan based on the back and forth between the applicant and the board. And I know that's not a popular statement to be made, and I know that there's some public opposition that's come here, but that's also, and I don't need to quote case law on that either, the public opposition is not a basis for denial either. How many people in the room put up their hands that say they don't want it versus they do want it is not a consideration for the board to make. The board has to look at the application within the confines of the ordinance. So with that, Mr. Chairman, unless there's any procedural questions for me, I appreciate your time in letting me speak and sum up. I I know there's been a lot of back and forth, and it's gone over a long period of time, but I do appreciate the board's time and dedication to the process. I know the board wants to come out with the best project possible, and I think we've done that. So I would respectfully request that the board make a motion to approve the application based on reasonable conditions, the ones that I read, and in the event that there are any others. And we're here to, of course, answer any other questions that you may have. And I thank the public as well for their participation in the process.
Mr. Duval, just a couple of points I wanted to see if we can agree on. And I apologize, I didn't answer your calls earlier today. I was in the hospital.
No, the chairman had mentioned that when I didn't see you here at 7 o'clock, because you're usually on time, so.
I apologize.
I hope everything's okay.
I believe it'll be good. I'm going back there in a little while. You're not seeking any variances, correct?
Correct.
No waivers?
No.
No site plan exceptions?
Correct.
Okay. With that, you know, I appreciate that the board does, you do, the developer does, the town does, but the public coming out for this, I think, is very important as well. What I'd like to just say for the record, because I think the public deserves it, the Dunkin' Donuts case that was thrown about a few minutes ago, Dunkin' Donuts versus Township of North Brunswick. The appellate division held that the planning board did not have authority to deny a site plan approval because of off-site traffic conditions, stating, in quotes, the authority to prohibit or limit use as generating traffic into already congested streets with a high rate of accidents is an exercise of the zoning power vested in the municipal governing body. And there's another case, Stochel versus Planning Board of Edison. Stochel, S-T-O-C-H-E-L. Bottom line is, governing body means the village council. So whether you like it or not, the zoning power as to, you know, whether it's allowed was vested with the governing body. The planning board has different duties. In terms of the planning board, the board must decide on the facts produced at the hearing. All testimony and all evidence on which the board makes its decision must be part of the record, and the board's decision must include the findings of the record of the facts and make its decisions and conclusions on points of law. So you take what the applicant presented, you decide whether that's sufficient or not under burden of proof. You take what the board's professionals independently presented objectively and decide how that fits in with the application and see what facts and expert evidence that is required is sufficient for the board to make a determination. In terms of what the planning board can do with the zoning use that the governing body requires of it, a municipality's authority to plan and zone allows to impose conditions on a developer as part of a police power of the ordinances. So the planning board can put on conditions. There's a case called ERG, container versus the board.
Everybody's writing down these citations, Chris, so you better get them right.
You already have my total. Board of Chosen Freeholders. The court noted the planning board could address noise and traffic which would be generated by the intensification of a permitted use. What does that mean? That means the governing body, the village council, allowed the use. There's arguments here and concerns of the citizens. I believe that it's going to be intensified. There's going to be more traffic. So the planning board can address that by imposing appropriate conditions and restrictions in connection with site plan approval rather than barring the proposed use, because the use is something that's not vested with this planning board. I believe our very own planner, Ms. McManus, addressed that in her testimony. So with the standards that Mr. Duval presented and hope some clarification by me, you need to take the facts as the board and move forward.
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, very, very briefly, would my client, the principal of the developer, just say a few words very briefly?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that, sure.
Okay. So I'd like to call Mr. John Saraceno. And John, we got to just swear you in briefly.
Mr. Saraceno, raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And just state your business and address.
My address is 17 Coventry Court, Ridgewood, New Jersey. 17? Coventry Court, Ridgewood, New Jersey. Saraceno.
Okay. And John, before you get into the substance of what you want to say, can you just, for the record, state your role in connection with the project and the applicant?
I am a member of the partnership that owns the property.
I am a member of the
Partnership that owns the property. This is, what I'd like to say is, I've heard the comments. There's a lot that goes into these processes. This room is a bad room. It doesn't allow for the dialogue that people want, but I would like to express to the people that showed up tonight and the people that showed up for 10 years, because this is how long this has been going on. There has been constant dialogue. Your representatives have represented you well, and there will be ongoing dialogue. Tonight is not the end of a process, it's actually the beginning of a very long one between an approval, hopefully, and the development of this site. I'm not going to apologize for it because I still think it's the right thing to do for the site. I still think it's the right thing to do for Ridgewood, and I'd advocate for it as vehemently as I have for the last 10 years, for the next 10 years. But I'm not insensitive to it. None of the partners are. There's a lot of Ridgewood residents that aren't supportive of this. There's a lot of Ridgewood residents that are actually involved in this project. And I think that's a good thing because we do care. And I think it's evidenced by the things that we do quietly in the community for many, many years, and will continue to do so. As it relates to this, I'd ask people to trust the process, trust your mayor, trust your council people, and trust the planning board. The room doesn't allow for dialogue, and it doesn't allow for a give and take. It's just the essence of the planning board process, but the diligence was immense. It is ongoing. We will look at all those things from the standpoint of in the future and look backs and things relative to lights and other relative issues to try and create a project that does not change the character of Ridgewood. I have no interest in changing the character of Ridgewood. I want to enhance the character of Ridgewood. I live here. I've lived here for almost 20 years. Actually, I've lived here for more than 20 years now. It's been so long, I forget. And I want to live here for another 20 years. And I hope that people appreciate the process and appreciate that developer doesn't equal bad guy, and developer doesn't equal someone who's sort of out for their own personal well-being in every sort of turn and corner. The reality is, as I said in the beginning, I'd advocate for it today as hard as I have to this point, and I would do the same thing I did to this point. And I hope that the people that are opposed appreciate that the people in the seats that are necessary to control and influence this process have done so in a way that will create a great project in Ridgewood. It's just that this room doesn't give you the feeling that it's going to get there, but it will, and I hope you can just trust that myself and our partners are going to do something that the village will be proud of when it's over. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions, or if issues come up during the course of deliberations that you need us to weigh in on, we're happy to do so.
All right, do I have a motion to formally close the hearing?
So moved.
Okay, Jeff, anyone, a second?
Second.
Okay, Joel's the second. Okay, it's a motion to close the hearing. Call the roll, Michael.
Mayor Knutson,
Yes.
Councilman Voigt,
Yes.
Torrielli,
Yes.
McWilliams,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Mr. Joel,
Yes.
Ms. Porto.
Yes.
Okay, now we're on to the deliberation part. Does anyone need a 5-minute break or anything? Okay. I was picking up the vibe.
Good.
All right, so
Good.
we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll start deliberation.
Councilman Voigt? Here. Mr. Torrielli? Mr. Torrielli? Here. Ms. McWilliams? Ms. McWilliams?
Here.
Mr. Schreibner?
Here.
Ms. Bartow?
Here.
And I'm here, too.
Richard, Mr.
Yep, here. Okay, we're back on. It's deliberation time. And I guess we'll start with Dave, unless anyone has any comments they want to add quickly before we can go down the line. No? Okay, Dave, you have the floor.
First of all, I would like to thank the members of the public who came tonight and made their voices heard. It's an important part of the process. Some of the sentiments that were voiced, while they don't directly impact what we need to do as a board, it's important to hear them. But I did want to say that change is hard, and the change that this particular development presents is probably a bigger change than most of us have seen in the village. But when I moved to the village, there were 3 hardware stores. Most of the businesses in the business district were locally owned. There was much less traffic. So what each individual feels like needs to be preserved is not necessarily the same thing. So we've actually lived through a lot of progress in the 33 years that I've lived here. And change isn't so bad after all, in my experience. So getting back to the application that we have before us here, it's big, but it's smaller than it could be. It presents more activity in an area that is already busy, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Ridgewood is a busy place. It's not a sleepy town. It's a vital place. It's an active place. And bringing families into the center of Ridgewood could actually be a positive thing. So, seeing that there are no variances, there are no exceptions, I don't see how we can turn this application down.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Jeff?
Yeah, I'd also like to thank the public for coming out. Their concerns are well noted, and hopefully will be addressed, as we move forward with this. They relate to safety of our downtown, of our children. They relate to our taxes, ensuring that our taxes are not going to go up. They relate to making our downtown a very manageable place, I think, for everybody. And so, I'm going to throw out some other reasonable conditions for this development, and hopefully we can discuss these as part of our deliberations. So one of the things we talked about last week with the Dayton, and this relates to infrastructure, and it relates to the infrastructure needs based on what this development's going to probably impart, and that relates to sewer and water. And the concern we had with the Dayton was that if there is a significant amount or cost of infrastructure that needs to be improved dramatically, that is something we can revisit if it gets to that point. And my concern is that, you know, us spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on the infrastructure in order for this thing to function adequately. That's one thing that I'm concerned about. The other thing I'm concerned about is relates to the corridor, the Franklin Ave corridor, and working. I think we need to, and the developer needs to work very actively with Bergen County in ensuring that we can procure some additional traffic lights here that again are not going to put an undue burden on our village and increase our taxes for doing so. And I just want to make sure that that is something that we can, you know, we think about or we can talk about. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the look back, and this is something that concerns me a bit, and it relates to, I think, Joel, your comment as it relates to looking at this in totality. You know, the developments plus, you know, we're going to have the Starbucks, which is a drive-through, and that particular corridor is going to be very active, you know, over time. And so the concern that I would have is that if we do anything as it relates to the upgrades of the intersections and a look back, say whatever time frame that is, that if additional improvements need to be made, that again, that is something that ends up being negotiated between the village and the developers, so that, and maybe even multiple developers, such that, you know, again, we do not have to bear the brunt of any additional costs that are incurred in any upgrades to any of the intersections. So those are the three things I'd like to put on the table, and I don't know if that's stuff we want to, you know, I'd like to talk about a little bit further, so that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Mayor Knudsen?
Sure. Okay, so first, thank you to the applicant, to your professionals, to the folks that came out on your behalf, and to Jason Duval, who's absolutely been very polite and very professional through this process. So I really actually have to compliment you. You've been outstanding. I also want to thank the residents for coming out this evening. I think I just know all of you, so it's all good. Before I get started, I wanted to share this little story that happened years ago at my house, and you'll appreciate it. Artist D'Angelo, and I know Janie Remus left, but years ago at my house when my kids were maybe 4, 8, and 9, I did what I called amnesty night. And whatever they did, the worst thing ever they did in their lives, they could tell us and they wouldn't get in trouble for it. And so my kids started to, each one told a little story, but my third son, there was a lot of whispering going on and I couldn't quite figure out what the problem was. I thought, did you steal something? Did you kick someone? Did you do something so awful? And finally he said, no, but you promise I can't get in trouble and I'll never be punished? And I said, promise. I was riding my bicycle on Franklin and I was hit by a car. And he never told us for over a year because he feared we would never permit him to ride his bicycle again. The woman who hit him helped him pick up his bicycle, made sure he was okay. He straightened out his bicycle, had a little scratch, and rode away. So I share your concerns about our children on Franklin, pedestrians, and I share your concerns. And I have heard the applicant, and they've addressed the concerns and have made some accommodations with the improvements to the cleaned up sidewalks, the handicap accessible ramps, and other such things, and we'll be looking at the lights. But in this instance, we don't get to vote with our heart. It's not a luxury here. We have to apply the law. On June 2nd, 2015, right here in this room, I guess it was, there was maybe it was a BF, now I don't recall. There was a vote on a master plan amendment. And that master plan amendment opened the door for ordinances to be adopted at the village council level. At the time of the master plan amendments, I said, I don't think this is good. I think the density's too high, the building's too big. What will happen? I voted no. When it came to the ordinances at village council, March 22nd, 2016. Thank you, 23rd, oops. Again, I voted no, knowing full well that there would be an inconsistency with the master plan and the ordinances, and that would have to be defined and addressed. But nonetheless, a 3-2 vote, council majority supported the ordinances. The clock ticked, and these ordinances became law, and that is the law that we need to apply today. That means there's this box, and the applicant can put their box inside of this box, and as long as they don't need any variances or any special accommodations, they are compliant. And that's the bar, that's the measure that we have to apply to this application and others. Last week was the Dayton application. So in as much as necessarily I've always felt that the density was too high, this is the law. This is what we have to deal with today. And, in just terms of the cost to infrastructure improvements, all of that I unequivocally agree with as stipulated, and all of these things will be outlined. I was hoping this was the Dunkin' Donuts case because that would be very easy, but we're not talking about Dunkin' Donuts here today. We're talking about a multifamily housing development. So based on just applying the law fairly, I will support the application as it is presently in its state to be fully conforming with zoning, and I do believe that we will have reasonable conditions applied to that as we go down through this process, but we will support this.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Francis?
Sure. I want to thank everybody as well for participating in this very long process. I'm just going to echo concerns that have been raised throughout. There are concerns about traffic in the immediate vicinity. There are safety concerns insofar as emergency services being able to reach these residents in light of the traffic issues. There are unknown costs to the village that we're all concerned about, I think. As was noted by the public, this was an auto dealership. It certainly is going to have an increase in volume of traffic in and out. That intersection is going to be problematic. I agree with Councilman Voigt that we need to seriously make sure that we have all the correct conditions in place. And in light of the fact that it's otherwise conforming, I guess otherwise conforming, I will go forward with the application.
I will vote
in favor of the application.
Okay, Melanie?
I thank, first I thank Jason for allowing me to be newer at this end of the process up here and being so courteous and polite in all of your responses and answers. You were nothing but helpful all the way around. The public for showing up when you did and when you could. I know how hard it is to come to these things. John, I appreciated your comments and your partners, and I see where, I try to see things from every angle that it's possible. Jason, you brought up the role of the board and what it is that we're required to do, and I sometimes feel like the law tries to fit everything into the box that applies to it specifically at that moment, and it can be the exact opposite at another, should the case that you're working on at that moment require. And you say we're not here to address whether or not this is sound zoning. But it is, you know, is it sound planning? Is it sound zoning? Is it sound living? Is it any of those things? And it can't be denied that that has to be a conversation. It is a fully conforming application, and I feel it is a fully conforming application because sound zoning was overlooked in the original process, and I wasn't here for that process. And that's my comment here and in the moment. That there is an expectation of approval by the developer, and you know, where that pertains to the role of the board, I don't think I'm trying to find a way for those two to jive here in this application. And you know, like I'd said, applying terms like reasonable where it suits the developer and not apply the same reasonable behavior to the intent of the board, that bothers me. I can't sit with that well. The units per acre, you know, you bring up the fact that you're at 32.8 and you just don't find that in urban areas, and I think that was your exact sentence. You don't find that in urban areas. This isn't an urban area. This is a suburban area. And
Sorry, I said that as to the, I'm sorry.
it's okay. I understand you don't. I'm not trying to.
Okay.
Have, you know, and maybe I misheard part of what you said. You know, my list of concerns are the safety, the traffic, the lights, the cost to the village. What happens when down the line, down that corridor, things that everybody here have addressed, the pieces of the puzzles don't work, and the cost to the village is too exorbitant for us to bear, and it isn't necessarily all in your or the developer's pocket. And then we all lose because we can't upgrade the way we need to, and the development is ultimately going to suffer, in my opinion, because it can't withstand it wouldn't be filled to capacity, it wouldn't be thriving. And I have real concerns about that. You know, there is this particular development, like Dave said, I think in particular, where it sits and the mass of it, all of the safety and traffic concerns, the amenity area, I've been very clear, I cannot get past that. That's a basis, a big part of the ordinance, and I think the amenity area is kind of pushing the definition of that. There isn't a single arbitrary or capricious thing in my not supporting the application. Arbitrary, whimsical, or random, or by chance and unpredictable is what that means. And, you know, capricious and meaning, you know, autocratic, and that's domineering and taking, you know, with no consideration to anybody else, the role you play. And I take everybody's. There's nothing about my not supporting it that's any of those things, but I don't support this application.
Joel? Please, no plus.
I'll keep my comments fairly brief, as I've been jotting down notes for the past however many months, 9 months, whatever. So I think Jason did a good job summarizing kind of the facts of the case, and there, I think, are many times during the hearings where I think we were just trying to do a lot of due diligence, and we kind of deviated and got into sometimes life safety issues and things that aren't really our purview. So a lot of what the applicant proposing is as of right. We have ordinances in the town, and I think Mayor Knutson summed it up well. The ordinance. We have ordinances in our town, and Mayor Knutson summed them up well. We have a box, and they can build inside the box, and they've done that. And I don't think anybody would disagree that the Ken Smith property is certainly in need of redevelopment. I mean, it's an eyesore, it's ridiculous, and it's a prominent spot in our community. I agree with Melanie that the outdoor amenity area is a joke. It won't be used. I can picture that just being a useless spot, and that's really unfortunate because I don't think that's the intent of the ordinance. The intent is to have an outdoor area that residents can enjoy, not, you know, whatever, a place where maybe somebody would go and sit and watch a train go by. So that's kind of a mess. I agree with a lot of what Jeff said with being concerned about the downstream effects of this development, literally and figuratively. Literally, the downstream effects of the sanitary waste flowing. If we repair one section of pipe You know, it's a network of pipes, and you're going to burden the whole system. It's a network of pipes, and you're going to burden the whole system. And you're going to burden the traffic system, the infrastructure of the town. I have concerns about that. And I think there were finite questions that remained unanswered throughout the hearing as far as the exact impact and the exact number of children or cars or pedestrians. And I think that's okay, because I think as a board what we do is we have qualified professionals come in and they give their opinion, and then other professionals come in and give their opinion, and then we debate as a board and we question them and we challenge them, and that's a good and healthy process. And I think we've done that. I think everybody on the board's paid attention. We've asked a lot of questions. We've not just accepted reports for what they are, and we've had professionals on both sides, the village and the applicant, come together, and I think they've done a good job. So generally, I'm in favor of the application, and I'd just close by saying I'm really looking forward to re-examining the master plan in its totality in the future with this board, because that's really what we need to be doing when we move past these multifamily applications.
Thanks, Joel. All right, I would like to thank the applicant, Jason. You did a very competent and good job presenting. Thanks. I would like to thank our experts for assisting us in this difficult and long process. It's very helpful. I'd like to thank the public for the input. We are kind of just like an antenna receiving information coming in. We ask questions and we try to do what's best for the village under the circumstances. We are confronted of having certain ordinances that we have to comply with, and this is a conforming plan. So, you know, based upon that, you have to work within that framework. But again, it's a balancing act. You know, it's conforming on the one hand, yet we want to get the best thing for the town. And I believe the applicant wants to have a win situation for the town too. They're going to be a resident, so they have a vested interest. I did like hearing that it's going to be a process and it's not over, and that there is room for even further improvement. I mean, you did indicate the certain pluses, but with certain developments, you know, there's also downsides with respect to certain things. So, you know, we're aware of that and we take that into consideration for it. So we've heard the evidence over 9 months, a lot of expert witnesses, a lot of questions, and the Ken Smith area is just a dead area. It does need redevelopment, hasn't really done anything, and I think it's really kind of a key piece of property within the town, and something nice should be there, and I think this can be a win-win for the village on it. But, you know, we also would like to have certain conditions to, you know, take care of any negatives that might be coming from the development. I like the one condition with respect to the tower element, having a committee and the planner review that so that we can make sure that we get it just right, because it can be a really showcase element for the town. Also, if, as Mayor Knutson mentioned, with moving that light box, I mean, if it's moved, you know, the person should pay for it. You know, that might be a condition for that. Affordable housing mixed throughout the project would be another condition with the same finishes. Upgrades to the sewer was the other thing that we have. And again, with the off-track improvements, you know, there should be a look back on it just to make sure that we can ferret out and make sure that we're not being shortchanged as a village on it. So I think that's very important on it. So, I mean, it's a difficult situation. I mean, again, you can't just vote with your heart. You have to vote with what the law is and what our charge is. And so we have to determine whether the development plan conforms with the zoning ordinance and the applicable provisions of the site plan ordinance. And I would say that the applicant has met the burden under the circumstances for it. And, you know, I would be voting in favor of it with the many conditions that we have to make sure that it's done right and protects the village. Sure.
Question. So two things that were said this evening, and I just wanted to address both. My board colleague, Melanie, suggested this wasn't sound zoning. That's not what our task is here tonight. Our task is not to determine whether or not this is sound zoning. Our task is to apply the existing zoning laws to this particular application. It's, as much as some of us would likely be happy to have that conversation, it's not what we are tasked here to do this evening. The one thing she said that I definitely wanted to address was the exterior amenity space, and I think that the vice chairman also pointed that out. And I appreciate that both raised it. And my question would be, is the applicant willing to work with us on, at a later time on that exterior amenity area? Because I do think that it's really nonsensical. It doesn't really work, and it appeared to be just an aside to fill that, an obligatory obligate, you know, an obligation. So
Can I answer that?
Sure.
Okay, because I just didn't want to speak out of turn. I think that was in Ms. McManus's letter. So as part of the, I would say as part of the architectural, same type of subcommittee, since it was part of, within her purview of her review, we can include that, you know, analysis in those meetings.
Okay, great.
Similar to the tower committee?
But yeah, exactly.
We like the tower committee. I think that.
Tower Amenity Space Committee.
It's other, which were made nameless, by the way. Other applicant attorneys may not be happy with that.
As a quick comment, I did not, my comment wasn't that this isn't sound zoning. I said, I was quoting Jason when he said that's not our role to determine if it's sound zoning, and that, you know, I was trying to look at the bigger picture of sound planning, sound living, how it affects the entire community, not necessarily, and hearing other pieces of commentary and a thought process. I wasn't quoting it specific. I was trying not to say those words. If I did, then I didn't mean to.
Okay, just as a point of just
No, I know, I was aware those were not, that's not our role here.
So I have one other comment. I guess if there's going to be a subcommittee, I would say that I would like Joel Torrielli, Mayor Knutson, and Isabella to be on it, because two architects and the mayor, I think, would be a good fit to look at it.
So it's a great idea, and I thank you for that. The only one thing that we will have to do, and once again, as we all know, our board colleague has been ill, quite ill, and so we'll just have to ensure that she's physically able to participate, hopefully. Yeah, I will figure that out. Okay, good. Okay.
All right. Any other comments from anyone else on the board?
Oh, just the, right, the look back in the 1 year, so that would be a stipulation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That'd be, okay.
Whoever makes the motion.
Okay.
I want to make sure that you guys are okay with this. We've made several additional stipulations here. I want to make sure that you're agreeable or not to them, that they're going to go into the resolution as stipulations. Yes or no?
Yes.
You'll agree to the stipulations that
Yeah,
I made?
I'll work on the resolution with Chris as
Okay.
with
All right.
what the language is.
We'll get the transcripts of it.
Sure.
Makes it easier.
Okay.
I think Jason has all the transcripts.
Yeah, I do. I have one.
Okay. Do I hear a motion from anyone?
Motion to approve with the stipulations that we made during our deliberations, which I think are in the transcript.
And the ones during the hearing process too, right?
I'm sorry, say again?
And the ones during the hearing process.
And the ones during the hearing process, as long as those are stipulated to, I'll make a motion to approve the application.
Mr. Boyd, stipulations and conditions.
Stipulations and conditions, yes.
Okay, do I hear a second? Second. Okay, we have a motion made by Jeff to approve the application with conditions and stipulations that were set forth in deliberations and during the hearing process, and we had a second from David. So we're going to call for the roll vote, and if you say yes, you're agreeing for the motion to approve. Okay, call the roll, Michael.
Mayor Knutson,
Yes.
Mr. Schreibner,
Yes.
Councilman Voigt,
Yes.
Mr. Torrielli,
Yes.
Mr. Joel,
Yes.
Ms. McWilliams,
No.
Ms. Bartow.
Yes.
Okay, the motion is carried. It's approved with all the stipulations and conditions.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your time, Mr.
Okay, I'll
Tavell.
be in touch with you, Chris. Thanks a lot, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just,
sure.
can we just, you just want to hang on 1 minute?
All right, we had no further,
I think John's going to make.
oh, did you want to address?
If I may.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
if
sure.
everyone doesn't mind, Mr. Saraceno just wanted to say a few words.
Okay.
Shut off our computer.
All right.
Folks, we're still in session, please.
Okay. Oop, oop, we're still on. Can you keep it down?
Make sure we get every word.
John Saraceno, 17 Coventry Court, Ridgewood, New Jersey. First of all, thank you. I appreciate, I take everything to a certain degree personally, so I appreciate the vote of confidence in us, in our team. I know that the scale of these things and the multiple numbers gave everyone pause, and I get it, I'm a resident. I'm not insensitive to it. One of the things that I think I wanted to, and outside of an approval, we can speak more openly about, but there has been ongoing and continuous negotiations to try and amend this plan, both from an architecture perspective, from a density perspective, and for other things that I think make the project a better project, one that we like better as well. But obviously in the context of this room and this process, it's always difficult to actually get to the sort of point where we can speak frankly and openly about some of the stuff. I don't make the rules, I just sort of follow them. Even though we had a compliant application, even though we had a compliant application that didn't require variances, and obviously from a technical perspective, I know that that makes it difficult on planning boards, and I know that I could have gone down a different path, and I think our partners could have. But as a resident and as someone who cares about the process, and I know the council and the people that have been involved, and Susan and Jeff and Matt, and inside the declaratory judgment action and other stuff that we've had conversations, it is a project that I think, when it's all said and done, everyone here, including Melanie, will actually like it. So, I just thank you again and hope that when it's all said and done, we have a project that we're all proud of. So thank you, appreciate it.
Okay.
That we're all proud of. Wednesday?
So, I mean, yeah, can we just say, so we're going to be setting a date for a public hearing on the settlement? Are we allowed to say that now?
Just until it gels, I'd rather not. We'll continue to work together. Yes. And for the record, I saw Mr. Mandelbaum out in the audience, and he was nodding on your comments as Mandelbaum, and he has been nodding his head in support of your comments, both the first time he spoke and the second time, and I know he's been here at every hearing, and I, for one, appreciate his commentary. We didn't necessarily agree on all issues, but we worked them through.
Looking forward to it, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, this was the only item on the agenda. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
Jeff, and
Second.
second. Melanie, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we're adjourned.